The night the snow would not stop falling, a lonely police officer heard a cry that did not belong to the storm. He followed the sound into the frozen dark and found something the world had almost erased: a tiny German shepherd puppy tied and sinking into the ice. What happened next would change two broken lives forever. This is a story about survival, about a heart that refused to stop beating, and about how sometimes the ones we rescue end up rescuing us before we begin. I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Please leave your location in the comments and say hello. Now, come with me into the snow, into the silence, and into a story that just might stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Winter had settled into North Hollow, a remote mountain town in the northern Rockies where the snow did not merely fall but ruled, where pine trees bowed beneath white crowns and the wind spoke in long, lonely sentences. On this particular evening, the storm had no intention of forgiving anyone. Snow swept sideways through the streets, covering shop signs, porch railings, and the quiet rows of small wooden homes as if the town itself were being gently erased. The lake on the eastern edge of town, Whispering Lake, locals called it, was already half sealed by ice, its black surface breathing slow, heavy clouds of frost into the air. Officer Daniel Crow, 41, drove his patrol car along the narrow road that curved beside the lake. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered but carrying his strength with a certain weariness, the kind that came from too many winters and too many memories that never quite loosened their grip. His dark hair was threaded with early silver at the temples, his beard trimmed close but never sharp, his eyes the steady gray of someone who had learned how to watch the world without expecting it to be kind. The badge on his chest was old and scuffed, same as the pain that lived quietly behind his ribs. 6 years ago, his wife Elena had died from a sudden heart condition, leaving behind a silence so heavy it had followed him everywhere since. Daniel still spoke to people with patience, still served the town with fairness, but something inside him had been walking alone for a very long time. The radio on his dashboard crackled and fell silent. No calls, no urgency. The town was sleeping. He slowed the cruiser near the lake, considering turning back toward the station, when the wind shifted. At first it was only the storm speaking, snow hissing against glass, ice ticking along the shoreline. Then, through that noise, came something else, a sound that did not belong to the storm. High, broken, fragile. A cry that carried the wrong shape for human pain, yet was unmistakably alive. Daniel's foot left the brake. He rolled the window down, letting the winter strike his face. The sound came again, sharper now, a thin scream dragged across the wind. He pulled the cruiser to the shoulder and stepped out. The cold hit him like a wall. Snow reached nearly to his knees as he moved toward the lake, following the sound across the frozen grass and down the slope toward the water. The world narrowed to that cry and the ache in his lungs. Near the shoreline, the snow thinned into cracked ice and black water. The reeds shuddered, half buried in frost, and between them something dark moved. A puppy. The animal was small, no more than 5 months old, clearly a German shepherd, with the classic black and tan coat dulled by water and ice. He was thin to the point of pain, ribs faintly visible beneath soaked fur, his legs trembling as he struggled in the freezing shallows. A frayed length of rope cut into the fur around his neck, red skin visible where the fibers had rubbed raw. The other end of the rope disappeared beneath the water, tied to the rusted frame of an old fishing sled lodged under the forming ice. The puppy slipped. For one suspended heartbeat, the world went silent. Daniel ran. He dropped his jacket and boots without slowing, crashing into the lake's edge, the water knifing into his skin with such force that his breath tore from his chest. He plunged forward, arms slicing through black water, eyes locked on the place where the puppy had vanished. The cold was a living thing, climbing his limbs, crushing his lungs, whispering that he was too late, that nothing survived this. His hand closed on fur. The puppy's body was limp, terrifyingly still. Daniel pulled him up and out of the water, staggering back onto the shore, pressing the tiny form against his chest. Snow soaked his shirt. Water dripped from the puppy's ears and muzzle, the rope still biting into his neck. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, faint as a ghost, the puppy's paw twitched. Daniel exhaled a sound that might have been a sob, might have been prayer. He tore the rope loose, wrapping the shaking body inside his own heat, and ran for the cruiser. The storm swallowed their footprints behind them. As Daniel drove, the puppy lay against him on the passenger seat, wrapped in Daniel's jacket, breath shallow, eyes closed, body cold as winter stone. Daniel spoke to him the entire way, words spilling out without form or planning, telling him about the road, the snow, the trees, about how close they were now, how he just needed to stay. The town's lights appeared through the storm like distant stars, and Daniel turned the siren on as he headed for the clinic on the north side of town. The puppy coughed once, just once, and that single broken sound felt like a promise the world had nearly forgotten how to make. They reached North Hollow Veterinary Clinic, a small brick building whose windows glowed warm against the storm. Daniel burst through the doors, snow and water trailing behind him, his voice cutting through the quiet. A receptionist looked up in alarm. She was a woman in her early 50s, medium height, silver hair pulled back in a loose knot, her expression calm but immediate, the kind of steadiness built from years of crisis and care. Her name badge read Marianne, and she was already moving before Daniel finished speaking. "Emergency," he said, his voice breaking. "He fell into the lake. He's not breathing right." Within seconds, a veterinary technician named Lila, a young woman in her late 20s, slender, dark-haired, eyes sharp with focus, ran from the back with a stretcher. Another tech, Owen, tall and quiet, freckles across his pale face, followed with heated blankets. They moved as one body, lifting the puppy from Daniel's arms with practiced gentleness, rushing him through swinging doors into the treatment room. Daniel followed, soaked and shaking, stopping only when the staff formed a wall of motion around the table. Oxygen, towels, heat lamps. A small mask pressed to the puppy's muzzle. Lila's hands moved in steady rhythm against the puppy's ribs. Owen wiped water from the animal's mouth. The clinic's veterinarian, Dr. Hannah Walsh, entered a moment later. She was in her mid-40s, tall, with kind eyes, and a voice that never rose no matter how high the stakes. Years earlier, she had lost her brother in a winter climbing accident, a loss that had shaped her into someone who treated every fragile life like borrowed light. "Male," she said after a brief exam. "About 5 months. Severe hypothermia, near drowning, but he's got a pulse." Daniel stood frozen near the wall, fists clenched, heart hammering so hard he thought it might split his ribs. "Will he make it?" Dr. Walsh met his eyes. "If you'd found him 5 minutes later, we'd be having a different conversation." Those words sank into Daniel like stones. They transferred the puppy into the warming unit, the small chamber glowing softly beneath heat lamps, IV fluids feeding into his leg, oxygen hissing with quiet persistence. The puppy looked like a shadow of himself, fur clumped, chest barely moving, but he was there. Dr. Walsh turned to Daniel. You can sit with him. Sometimes it helps. Daniel pulled a chair close and reached out, resting his hand lightly on the puppy's paw. The pads were still icy. He swallowed hard. "You fought out there," he whispered. "Don't stop now. I've got you." Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had lost its meaning. Then the puppy's paw twitched again. His body shivered just slightly, like some tiny flame was trying to wake inside him. Lila checked the monitor and nodded. "He's stabilizing slowly." "Whatever he's been through, he's got fight." Daniel let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. The storm continued to rage outside, snow painting the windows white, but inside the clinic, under gentle lights and steady hands, a life refused to leave the world. And Daniel, soaked and shaking, realized that whatever else the winter had planned for him, it had already placed something living and fragile into his arms. Night folded itself around North Hollow Veterinary Clinic the way winter always did in this town, slowly, heavily, as if the darkness were another layer of snow. The storm outside showed no sign of mercy. Wind scraped the windows with frozen fingers, while white drifts climbed the walls like something trying to break inside. Inside the clinic, warmth hummed through radiators, heat lamps burned low and steady, and the world reduced itself to one small table and the fragile body lying upon it. Officer Daniel Crow remained near the wall, his soaked uniform clinging to his broad frame, dark hair dripping onto the tile floor. He had not moved since they transferred the German Shepherd puppy into the warming unit. At 41, Daniel carried himself with the quiet discipline of a man who had spent most of his life watching for trouble and learning how to outlast it. His gray eyes never left the glass chamber where the puppy lay wrapped in blankets, his chest rising and falling so shallowly it seemed more like memory than motion. Dr. Hannah Walsh, the clinic's senior veterinarian, stood at the head of the table, tall and steady, with light brown hair pulled back in a simple knot, and eyes shaped by long years of grief and responsibility. She spoke in a voice that never rushed, never softened the truth, but never crushed hope either. She had learned that tone after losing her younger brother on an icy mountain trail 12 winters earlier, a loss that left her patient, precise, and deeply kind. "We're holding him stable for now," she said quietly. "His core temperature is climbing, but slowly. That's what we want. Too fast would shock his system." Beside her, Lila Moreno, 28, slim, with dark hair braided tight and hands that never trembled even when her heart did, adjusted the oxygen flow. Lila had once grown up in foster care, moving between houses, learning early that living things needed consistency to survive. She had chosen veterinary medicine because animals, unlike people, always told the truth about their pain. Owen Carter, the other technician, tall, pale, freckles scattered across his cheeks, moved quietly between machines. Owen rarely spoke unless necessary. He had lost his mother to cancer when he was 17, and since then he worked as if every fragile life were something he could not afford to lose again. The puppy lay between them, wrapped in thermal blankets, a clear oxygen mask fitted over his small muzzle. His fur, black and tan, clung in wet spikes along his thin frame. The rope mark around his neck stood out in angry red against pale skin. Daniel swallowed. "What's his condition?" Dr. Walsh glanced up. "Severe hypothermia, near drowning, dehydration, likely malnourished. No broken bones, though his muscles are weak. He's young." "That's in his favor." "How young?" Daniel asked. 5 months, maybe a little less." Daniel's jaw tightened. He thought of the lake, the rope, the ice. 5 months was nothing, barely a beginning. Dr. Walsh continued. The next hour is critical. We need to watch his breathing, heart rhythm, neurological response. If he maintains improvement, he'll stay with us overnight and likely the next day. And if he doesn't? She did not dodge the question. Then we do everything we can. Daniel nodded, the answer settling like snow in his chest. They allowed him to sit beside the warming unit. He pulled a chair close, resting his forearms on his knees, his big hands folded as if holding something invisible. His wet clothes slowly steamed under the heat lamps, but he barely noticed. His gaze stayed locked on the small rise and fall of the puppy's chest. "Hey," he whispered. "You're safe now. You just need to stay." Time passed in strange fragments. The storm outside howled. Snow struck the glass in soft explosions. The clinic clock ticked with slow patience. Then the puppy coughed. It was barely more than a breath, broken and weak, but it carried the weight of everything. Lila looked up sharply. "He just cleared his airway." Owen checked the monitor. "Heart rate is improving." Dr. Walsh nodded once. "Good. Keep him warm. Slow and steady." Daniel's hands shook as he reached out, his finger brushing the puppy's paw. The pads were no longer ice. They were cool, alive. Minutes became an hour, then 2. The puppy's breathing evened. His eyelids fluttered once, then again. His paw twitched, small and uncertain, like he was trying to remember how to belong to his own body. Daniel leaned closer. "That's it. You're doing it." Dr. Walsh studied the readings and finally allowed a small smile. "He's stabilizing." The words felt like dawn. They moved the puppy to a quieter room for overnight observation. Daniel remained in the chair, refusing the offer of coffee, refusing the offer of dry clothes. He had been cold before. This was nothing. Around 3 in the morning, Dr. Walsh stepped beside him. "He's going to make it through the night." Daniel's breath caught. He nodded slowly, as if afraid the words might break if he moved too fast. "You saved him," she said. Daniel shook his head. "He saved himself. I just happened to be there." She studied him, understanding more than she said. "We'll keep him under observation tomorrow. If all continues well, he may be strong enough for discharge within 48 hours, under strict home care." Daniel hesitated. "I'll do whatever he needs." Dr. Walsh placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I believe that." The storm finally eased near morning. Pale light crept through the frosted windows, softening the world. Daniel dozed in the chair for a few minutes at a time, waking whenever the puppy stirred, the rhythm of his breathing anchoring him. At dawn, the puppy opened his eyes. They were deep brown, clouded with exhaustion and pain, but very much awake. He looked at Daniel, not afraid, not confused, just searching. Daniel felt something inside him shift, a door that had been closed too long, opening on rusted hinges. "Morning," he whispered. The puppy's tail did not move. His body was still weak, but his gaze stayed on Daniel's face. The storm outside was gone. Snow lay calm and untouched across the town of North Hollow. Inside the clinic, under gentle light and careful hands, a life that had nearly been erased was still here. And Daniel, sitting watch beside that small body, knew with quiet certainty that this moment had already changed both of them. Morning arrived in North Hollow with the kind of pale, hesitant light that only winter knew how to make. Snow still blanketed the streets, the trees, the roofs of small mountain houses, but the storm had withdrawn its fury and left behind a fragile silence. Inside the veterinary clinic, warmth hummed through the walls, and that quiet, steady heat felt like a promise. Officer Daniel Crow had not gone home. He remained in the same chair where he had sat through the long night, his uniform now dry but wrinkled, his dark hair uncombed, his face carrying the rough exhaustion of a man who had not allowed himself to rest. At 41, Daniel had learned how to stay awake for emergencies, how to function when sleep was a luxury. What he had never learned was how to walk away from something that was still fighting. The German Shepherd puppy lay inside the warming chamber, wrapped in fresh blankets, an IV line still feeding fluids into his thin leg, oxygen tubing resting near his muzzle. In daylight, the puppy looked even smaller. His black and tan fur had begun to dry, revealing how narrow his chest was, how sharp the angles of his ribs pressed against the skin. His ears, still soft and oversized for his head, lay folded back in exhaustion. His eyes were open now, deep brown, glassy but aware, following the movement of the room with cautious curiosity. Dr. Hannah Walsh entered with her clipboard, her posture composed, her kind eyes already reading the monitors before she reached the bedside. "Vitals are holding," she said quietly. "His temperature is climbing at the right pace. Hydration is improving. Lungs are clear of most fluid." Daniel released a breath. "He's looking at me." Dr. Walsh glanced down and smiled faintly. "That's a very good sign." The puppy shifted slightly, one paw sliding over the blanket with a weak, uncertain movement. His gaze fixed on Daniel's face again. Daniel leaned closer. "Hey there." The puppy did not whimper. He did not growl. He simply watched him. Later that morning, Lila Moreno brought in a shallow dish of warm broth and carefully lowered it near the puppy's mouth. "He can try a little," she said. "Just a few sips." Daniel held the dish while Lila supported the puppy's head. At first, nothing happened. The puppy's nose twitched once, then again. His tongue flicked out, touching the surface of the broth. One slow lap, then another. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "That's it," he whispered. "You're doing it." By noon, the puppy had taken several small sips. His breathing remained steady. He dozed between moments of awareness, his body conserving every ounce of strength. Dr. Walsh approached Daniel near the window where snowlight spilled across the floor. "He's stable enough that I think we can release him this evening," she said. "Under strict conditions." Daniel's heart jumped. "Release him?" "Yes, he needs quiet, constant warmth, no stress, no noise. He's still fragile, but the clinic can only offer so much. A calm home environment will do more for him now than machines." Daniel nodded without hesitation. "He can come with me." Dr. Walsh studied him for a long moment. "Do you have someone who can help you monitor him?" Daniel shook his head. "It's just me." She considered that, then nodded. "That may be exactly what he needs." Before dusk, the paperwork was completed. Dr. Walsh reviewed instructions in her steady, careful voice. "Small amounts of broth and water every hour. Keep him near a steady heat source. No exertion, no walks, no stimulation. If his breathing changes, if he becomes unresponsive, you bring him back immediately." Daniel signed everything without reading twice. When the nurse finally carried the puppy out wrapped in blankets and placed him in Daniel's arms, the weight felt unreal, too small, too important. Outside, the town of North Hollow lay beneath a blanket of snow, chimneys releasing thin trails of smoke, street lamps glowing soft gold against white. Daniel drove slowly, every turn careful, the puppy's breathing his only guide. Daniel's cabin sat on the edge of town, tucked between tall pines that creaked gently in the wind. He carried the puppy inside, kicking the door closed behind him, warmth filling the small room. The cabin smelled faintly of pine, old wood, and the quiet of years spent alone. He laid thick blankets near the fireplace, building a nest of heat and softness. He placed the puppy down carefully. The puppy curled instinctively, pressing his body into the fabric as if he had been cold for far longer than one night. Daniel knelt beside him, gently drying the puppy's fur with a towel, careful around the raw mark at his neck where the rope had cut into him. The sight of that wound twisted something deep inside Daniel's chest. "You shouldn't have been there," Daniel murmured. "You shouldn't have been alone." He brought a small bowl of warm broth and held it near the puppy's mouth. The puppy sniffed, then lapped slowly, each movement costing him effort. Daniel stayed there through the night, sitting on the floor, his back against the couch, his jacket draped over his shoulders. He dozed in short fragments, waking every few minutes to check the puppy's breathing, to adjust the blankets, to add another log to the fire. Near midnight, he woke to a sound so small he almost missed it. A whine, soft, uncertain. Daniel leaned closer. The puppy's eyes were open, barely, watching him. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't reach. He simply stayed. After a long moment, the puppy blinked once and rested his head again. Morning came. The puppy was still breathing. Daniel laughed quietly, the sound rough from lack of sleep, and wiped his face with the back of his hand. He knelt beside the blankets. "Good morning." The puppy's eyes opened and tracked him. That was new. That was everything. He brought more broth. This time the puppy drank a little more. His mouth trembled with effort, but he did not stop. Daniel caught his reflection in the dark surface of the cup, unshaven, tired, older than he remembered, and somehow not alone. He lowered himself to the floor beside the puppy, his shoulder against the couch. Outside the window, snow was melting in slow patches, the promise of spring faint but real. At some point, the puppy's paws began to twitch. His legs jerked sharply once, like he was running from something only he could see. A tiny whimper escaped his throat. Daniel leaned closer. "It's okay. You're safe." The puppy stirred, eyes fluttering open again. This time, when he saw Daniel, he tried to move. His head lifted slightly. One paw shifted toward him. It was clumsy, weak. But it was a choice. Daniel's throat tightened. "You're a fighter." The afternoon light softened across the room. Oh. Daniel opened the window just enough to let fresh air drift in. The scent of thawing earth and pine filled the cabin. The puppy slept again, deeper now, his breathing steadier. As Daniel watched him, the thought came without warning. Names matter. They are the first anchor to life. He looked at the small face resting against the blanket, those deep brown eyes when open, the stubborn set of his jaw even in sleep. "You need a name," Daniel said quietly. The name came before he could stop it. Atlas. The puppy's ear twitched. Daniel smiled. "Atlas," he repeated. "That's you." The world outside was still winter, still cold, still uncertain, but inside the cabin, by the fire, a life had begun again. Winter still ruled North Hollow, though the storm that had delivered Atlas into Daniel Crow's life had finally loosened its grip. The sky hung low and pale above the mountains, the kind of gray that felt neither night nor day, and snow lay quiet on the roofs and along the narrow roads like a secret the town was keeping. Daniel drove slowly toward Whispering Lake, the heater in his truck humming, the world passing in white silence beyond the windshield. Atlas lay on the passenger seat, bundled in blankets, his head resting against Daniel's coat. The puppy was stronger now, his breathing steady, his eyes open and alert. Though still thin and moving carefully, he watched everything: the passing trees, the blur of fences, the changing light, as if the world were something new and fragile. Daniel had waited until Atlas could stand without trembling, until he could drink on his own, until his body held enough warmth that Daniel no longer feared leaving him for an hour. Only then did Daniel decide to return to the lake. The place where a life had nearly ended deserved the truth. The road curved downward, pine trees rising like dark witnesses along the edge. The lake opened before them, its surface now mostly frozen, a sheet of dull silver beneath the sky. Snow had settled across the shoreline, but the marks of violence were not so easily erased. Daniel parked and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled of ice and wet earth. Atlas stirred, lifting his head, ears tilting forward. "It's all right," Daniel said softly. "Just stay warm." He wrapped Atlas tighter and stepped away from the truck, boots crunching toward the reeds where the ice had cracked weeks earlier. The fishing sled was still there, half-buried, twisted, rusted, its metal frame jutting through the snow like broken ribs. The water around it was sealed now, but beneath the ice the dark lake waited, silent and endless. Daniel crouched beside the sled. There was the rope, frayed, coarse, loop knotted badly around the frame. The fibers were stiff with old moisture, the ends shredded as if something had struggled until it could struggle no more. A strip of blue fabric fluttered from the reeds, half frozen, caught on a thorn. The same faded blue Daniel had seen tangled in Atlas's fur that first night, the makeshift ribbon that had circled the puppy's neck like someone had once meant to mark him as something that belonged, then forgotten him entirely. Daniel's jaw tightened. He took photographs, logged coordinates, documented everything. The officer in him demanded the record even when the man in him wanted to tear the world apart. Later that day the report was filed. The case moved, as cases like this often did, into the slow machinery of unanswered questions. No witnesses, no nearby cameras, no fingerprints left by a storm that had erased everything except the truth itself. Someone had chosen this. Daniel returned home as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Atlas met him at the door, tail making a weak but hopeful sweep across the floor. Daniel knelt and touched his forehead. "They tried to make you disappear." Atlas licked his hand. Weeks passed. Snow melted in slow veins across the fields. Day by day, Atlas grew stronger. He learned the house, the yard, the trail behind the cabin. He slept near the fire at night, close enough that Daniel could hear his breathing from the couch. But water remained the enemy. The first time Daniel opened the back door and the sound of the creek drifted inside, Atlas froze. His body locked, his ears flattened, his breath came sharp and shallow. Daniel closed the door at once, crouched beside him, and waited. "You're safe," Daniel whispered. Atlas's body trembled, not from cold, from memory. The scar around his neck became more visible as his fur thickened, a pale ring against new black and tan. It told the story his mouth could not. Then came the second storm. The wind rose suddenly in the night, tearing through the trees, thunder rolling over the mountains like something ancient and furious. The power flickered, rain mixed with sleet, hammering the roof. Atlas paced near the back door, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. His tail was tucked, his breathing quick. "It's just the storm," Daniel said gently. "But storms remember things too." When the thunder cracked again, Atlas bolted. Daniel grabbed his jacket and flashlight and ran after him. Branches lashed his face. The forest roared with rain and wind. He followed the sound of Atlas's bark, sharp and desperate, deeper into the trees until the beam of his flashlight caught the broken shape of a fallen pine across the trail. Atlas was there, clawing at the branches. Beneath the weight of the limbs lay a young fox, its body crushed, eyes blinking slowly, blood dark against wet fur. Atlas stood over it, body tense, barking, refusing to leave. Daniel froze. The puppy that had once been left to die now guarded another life. Daniel moved carefully, pushing the branches aside, working until the fox was free. He wrapped it in his jacket and carried it back through the storm, Atlas never leaving his side. They placed the fox in a crate near the fire. Daniel did what he could. Warmth, water, quiet. The fox did not survive the night. Atlas lay beside the crate until dawn, head on his paws, eyes open, keeping watch. Daniel sat on the floor beside him. "You didn't run," Daniel said softly. "You chose to stay." Atlas leaned against him. By morning, the storm had passed. The world outside was rinsed clean, pale blue sky stretching across the mountains. Daniel called Evergreen Ridge Canine Rescue Center later that week. He spoke with Sarah Whitmore, the intake coordinator, a woman in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with warm brown eyes and a voice shaped by years of listening to other people's heartbreak. She had once lost her own dog during a house fire and had devoted her life since to building new endings for animals who needed them. She asked the details: age, breed, condition, what had happened. Daniel gave her the facts. She offered placement, training, a future. Daniel thanked her and said he would call back. That night he lay awake on the couch while Atlas slept by the fire, the house breathing around them. He knew some lives were meant to pass through yours, not stay, and leave you changed forever. Spring came to North Hollow like a whisper. The snow retreated slowly from the edges of fields and roads, leaving behind dark soil and the soft green promise of grass. The mountains remained crowned in white, but the air had changed. It smelled of thawing earth, wet pine, and beginnings. Atlas felt it. He stood on the porch of Daniel Crow's cabin, nose lifted, ears tilted forward, drinking in every unfamiliar sound and scent. At 6 months old now, he had gained weight, his ribs no longer visible beneath his thickening black and tan coat. His legs were stronger, his eyes brighter. Only the pale scar around his neck remained, the last physical echo of the rope that had once marked him. Officer Daniel Crow, still carrying winter in his bones, watched him from the doorway. The months had softened Daniel's grief in ways he had not expected. He slept more. He smiled sometimes without realizing it. He spoke out loud again, not just to the walls, but to the living creature who followed him from room to room like a shadow stitched with hope. That morning they walked the trail behind the cabin. Atlas moved carefully at first, pausing at every rustle of leaves, every shifting branch. Then, halfway down the path, something happened. A pine cone fell from above. Atlas leapt, not in fear, in play. He skidded across the damp earth, tumbled, then looked back at Daniel with wide eyes, as if unsure whether the world allowed such joy. The sound startled both of them. Atlas's tail gave a hesitant sweep, then another. For one brief moment, he was not a survivor, not a victim, just a puppy learning how to be alive. But the peace did not last. At the bend in the trail, a car door slammed somewhere beyond the trees. The sharp metallic echo shattered the quiet. Atlas dropped flat to the ground. His body went rigid, his ears pinned back, his tail curled under his belly. His breathing turned fast and shallow, eyes locked on the direction of the sound as if something monstrous waited there. Daniel knelt beside him. "It's okay. You're safe." Atlas did not move. 5 long minutes passed before he stood again. Daniel did not force him forward. They turned back home. That night the storm came without warning. Wind slammed into the cabin. Thunder rolled over the mountains. Rain mixed with sleet, drumming against the roof. Atlas began to pace. His head stayed low. His ears were back. His eyes followed the windows as if expecting something to break through them. Daniel moved slowly, kneeling near him. "It's just weather, buddy." But Atlas did not hear the words. When the thunder cracked again, Atlas bolted. Daniel grabbed his coat and flashlight and ran into the storm. Rain soaked his face. Branches tore at his arms. He followed Atlas's bark into the forest until the beam of his flashlight found him at the base of a fallen pine. Atlas was digging, barking, refusing to leave. Daniel pushed branches aside and froze. A young raccoon lay trapped beneath the limbs, its body crushed, eyes blinking slowly, breath barely moving. Atlas looked up at Daniel with something raw and urgent in his eyes. Not fear, purpose. Daniel worked fast, freeing the raccoon, wrapping it in his jacket. He carried it home as Atlas walked beside him, soaked, shaking, but steady. They placed the raccoon in a crate by the fire. Daniel did everything he could. Warmth, water, quiet. The raccoon did not survive the night. Atlas lay beside the crate until morning, guarding it in silence. Daniel sat on the floor with him, the storm's memory still echoing through the trees. "You didn't run," Daniel whispered. "You stayed." Atlas leaned against him. Something inside Daniel broke open. The next days passed differently. Atlas followed Daniel everywhere. He rested his head on Daniel's boots while he drank coffee on the porch. He lay beside him as he worked in the shed. He slept closer now, his breathing steady and warm. Daniel knew the truth he had been avoiding. Atlas needed more than this cabin. More than one lonely man. He needed a family, children to follow, fields to run, a life where fear no longer ruled the sound of water or the crash of doors. Daniel called Evergreen Ridge Canine Rescue Center again. Sarah Whitmore answered. Tall, gentle-voiced, with a heart shaped by loss and service, she listened without interruption. "He's ready," Daniel said. She did not argue. They set the date. Daniel spent the next days with Atlas as if each moment were a photograph. They walked the trail again. Atlas did not freeze at the sound of the creek this time. He paused, looked at the water, then continued. They sat by the fire. Atlas placed his head on Daniel's knee and slept. Daniel carved Atlas's name into a strip of cedar and hung it above the place where he slept. The night before Sarah's arrival, Daniel did not sleep. Atlas lay near the fire, peaceful, unaware of the morning waiting for him. Daniel watched the flames and whispered, "You were never meant to stay. You were meant to heal and go make the world bigger." Atlas's ears twitched. Morning came. The truck from Evergreen Ridge pulled into the drive. Sarah stepped out, her brown hair tucked beneath a knit hat, her coat dusted with road snow. She knelt, letting Atlas approach her on his terms. Atlas sniffed her hand. Then he turned and looked at Daniel. For a long moment, Daniel knelt, resting a hand against Atlas's chest. "You've got this." Atlas licked his hand. He walked to the truck without looking back. Daniel stood in the quiet long after they were gone. The house felt empty, but not broken. Atlas had not taken the light with him. He had left it behind. Spring never truly arrived in North Hollow all at once. It crept in on quiet feet, nudging the snow aside inch by inch, leaving behind pale grass and the scent of thawing earth. The mountains still wore their winter crowns, but the valley below had begun to breathe again. Daniel Crow stood on the porch of his cabin with a mug of coffee in his hands, watching the world wake. The trail behind the house, the one Atlas used to follow him down each morning, lay empty now. The cedar plank above the fireplace still carried the carved letters of Atlas's name. The blankets by the hearth were neatly folded, but they no longer carried the steady rhythm of a small chest rising and falling. The house was quiet again, not the hollow, aching silence that had followed Elena's death. This was a softer quiet, a healing one. Days passed, then weeks. Daniel returned to his patrol routine. He spoke more with the townspeople. He laughed sometimes. When the wind brushed the pines just right, he still expected to hear paws on the wooden floor, but instead of pain, the memory brought warmth. One morning, an envelope waited in his mailbox. The return address read, Evergreen Ridge Canine Rescue Center. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a photograph. Atlas sat in the middle of a wide green yard, his coat shining, his ears tall and proud. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, with curly blonde hair and a pink jacket, hugged his neck, laughing. Behind them stood a young couple, their faces bright with a kind of happiness that came from choosing something and knowing it was right. The letter was brief. Atlas has been adopted by the Harper family. He sleeps at the foot of Lily's bed, follows her to school each morning, and guards the house like he was born for it. He has begun training as a therapy and service companion. He is brave, gentle, and deeply loved. Thank you for saving him. Daniel sat on the porch steps for a long time. The snow melted in the sun. That evening, Daniel walked the trail behind his cabin for the first time since Atlas had left. The trees whispered overhead. The creek ran softly. He reached the bend where Atlas had once frozen in fear of the water. Daniel stopped. The water shimmered in the light. He stepped forward and kept walking. Life continued its slow, steady work. Months later, autumn painted the mountains gold and fire red. Daniel volunteered at the town's winter festival. He spoke at the school about animal safety. He found himself smiling at strangers again. On the first snowfall of the new winter, Daniel received another letter. This one was handwritten. It was from Lily Harper. Dear Mr. Daniel, Atlas saved me from being scared of the dark. When I have bad dreams, he licks my face and stays until I fall asleep. Mommy says he is a miracle. I think you are too. Thank you for my best friend. Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Elena's photograph on the mantel. Outside, snow fell softly. The world had come full circle. That night, Daniel dreamed of a small black and tan puppy standing in falling snow, looking back once before running into sunlight. He woke with a smile. The next morning, Daniel returned to Whispering Lake. The ice had formed again. The reeds were buried. The world was quiet. He stood at the shoreline and whispered, "You made it." The wind carried his words across the frozen water. When Daniel returned home, he placed a new cedar plank above the fireplace. It read, Atlas, 2025. Not a grave, a promise. Because some lives do not stay, but they change everything they touch. And in the quiet of that winter cabin, Daniel Crow finally understood something simple and true. He had not rescued Atlas. Atlas had rescued him. Sometimes God does not send miracles wrapped in light. Sometimes he sends them cold and trembling, found in the snow when the world seems most silent. This story reminds us that no life is ever forgotten by God, that even when someone has been hurt, abandoned, or broken, he still writes a new ending through love, through courage, and through the hands of those willing to care. In our own daily lives, we may not be rescuing a puppy from a frozen lake, but we all meet someone who is tired, scared, lonely, or hurting. And when we choose kindness in that moment, we become part of God's miracle for them. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to you, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing stories of faith, love, and healing into your life. May God bless you and your family. May He keep you safe and strong in every season. And may you always remember that you matter deeply to Him if you believe in that promise. Please type Amen in the comments.